Chapter 11 of Fact Stranger Than Fiction by John Patterson Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John D. Rockefeller. I'm writing this short sketch, embracing some of my personal reminiscences of Mr. Rockefeller and members of his family for several reasons, but principally because I have always admired his sterling manhood, his exemplary life, his democratic affiliations amongst the people of his acquaintance, and his unexampled, unselfish generosity. With all his wealth and social and financial influence, Mr. Rockefeller has come very near to leading the plain, simple life, and though I have met him frequently in this, his home city, during the past 63 years, yet I have never discovered in him or his family anything of the supercilious, highbrow characteristic which is so often in evidence on the part of persons who are rich in this world's goods. He has always worn his heart upon his sleeve to be read of all men, whether in the church, the Sunday school, in the varied avenues of commercial life, or elsewhere. Even the poor, despised Negro, both in the North and the Southland, has basked in the light of his countenance, and found in him a true open-handed friend. Hence I not only admire him, and wonder at his unheard-of financial conquests, but I hold him up to the whole world as an example of true manhood and unadulterated Americanism. Many years ago I noticed and was struck with the fact that whenever, as a captain of industry, Mr. Rockefeller absorbed collateral branches of his own gigantic business, it was to the advantage of the other party. It always took on new life, which led to overwhelming success, so that in no sense, even along the lines of competitive commercial transactions, can he be stigmatized as a business vampire. I've already mentioned the fact of seeing Mr. Rockefeller as a young man in 1858, when the family lived in Cedar Avenue in Cleveland, at which time I paid no special attention to him, for the reason principally that I was his junior, associating with a class of boys younger than he, of whom his late brother, Frank Rockefeller, was one, and for the additional reason that I could not then foresee what the fates held in store for him in the not distant future. Subsequently, in 1859, when I was a student in the Hudson Street School, now Sterling School, over which Mr. Eaton, afterwards during the Civil War, General Eaton, was principal, I met a mild-mannered, quiet little lady, who taught the class of which I was a member English grammar. This young lady was none other than Miss Laura C. Spelman, the late lamented wife of the subject of this sketch, and the daughter of the Hon. H. B. Spelman, ex-member of the Ohio General Assembly, if I mistake not, a gentleman who, for his social and business attainments, stood high in the esteem of all Cleveland. The fact that Miss Spelman and Mr. Rockefeller later on became husband and wife more than any other cause, kept them in the eye of some of us schoolboys, for we regretted the loss of that estimable lady from the faculty so keenly that we followed her in the future with undiminished interest. Aside from this casual acquaintance with Mr. Rockefeller, I had no knowledge of him or his growing business other than as I heard members of his Sunday school class speak of him or read of his successful transactions in the daily newspapers. The years glided or flew onward, and my subject waxed fat, became immensely rich in the eyes of the world, and through competition and in some instances jealousy was frequently unjustly criticized, until one day during a session of the 69th General Assembly, if I mistake not, a member, without any apparent reason for it, digressed from the line of his argument to brutally and falsely make a verbal assault upon Mr. Rockefeller in the matter of his business transactions. When he resumed his seat, I waited for a short space to see whether any member would challenge his statements, and the silence not being broken, I rose and gave expression to my views of Mr. Rockefeller, predicated on my knowledge of him from my boyhood days in no uncertain manner, and least of all complimentary to the member. Colonel Lewis Smith-Knight was present during the whole transaction, and when the applause following my short speech had subsided, he came up and congratulated me, and commended the spirit which moved me. All knew that Mr. Rockefeller did not need any apologist or champion. Yet under any circumstances it is difficult to remain silent when uncalled for and unmerited abuse is heaped upon one's friend, especially in a legislative hall. A year or two after the incident which I have just recorded, while passing through Lower Euclid Avenue in Cleveland, I was confronted by a gentleman whose personal appearance and mien stamped him as being facile princeps, first amongst men. I knew at a glance that he was a Rockefeller, but so much time had elapsed since I had last seen him that I could not positively identify him. To my great surprise, he stopped and addressed me, calling me by name. I reciprocated the courtesy and said, "Mr. Rockefeller, I believe." "Yes," he answered. "Which one?" I queried. "John," he replied. "How is Mrs. Rockefeller?" I ventured to ask. "She is quite well," he rejoined. Then he added, "Mrs. Rockefeller and I have noted your political successes with much pleasure, and she often speaks of some of her former pupils," to which I expressed much pleasure. Whereupon he said, "By the way, we have a cozy home in the East End. We would be pleased to have you and Mrs. Green come out and visit us sometime." I inquired as to a convenient time for them, and he suggested that we notify them, and they would send the family carriage to the terminus of the street railway line at Lake View Cemetery to transport us the remainder of the distance to Forest Hill, the cozy home. We then separated, each going his respective way, he conscious, I dare say, of having stooped, socially at least, to lift up and encourage a fellow man, and I radiant with pleasure and expectation by reason of the unexpected invitation. In due time a notice of our coming was mailed to Forest Hill, and at the designated hour on the appointed day, we, Mrs. Green, our daughter Clara, and our niece, Miss Kitty Skene, together with this writer, alighted at the terminus of the street railway, and mounted into the carriage of John D. Rockefeller. And in a few minutes, having passed the porter's lodge, we found ourselves upon the broad veranda of the Rockefeller mansion, the subjects of a genial and cordial welcome on the part of Mrs. Rockefeller, her aged mother, her honourable sister, and two winsome daughters. Mr. Rockefeller, we were informed, was in conference with gentlemen who had come all the way from New York for that purpose. During the half hour while the ladies were engaged in conversation, I was comparatively mute, or, under existing circumstances, I felt that, like the Moor of Venice, I could truthfully say, "Rude am I in my speech, and little blessed with the set phrase of peace." And accordingly I maintained that golden silence which at times is most becoming. Ere long the touring carriage was driven up to the porte cochere, and at the suggestion of Mrs. Rockefeller we all entered it for a drive through the spacious and beautiful park surrounding the residence. And at the end of 1 hour and a quarter, without repeating any of the route, we declare it to have been the most enjoyable of our existence. At one point on our route our hostess invited us to dismount, and while the driver waited for us on the opposite side of a shaded grove, we meandered through it, engaged in reminiscent conversation, and in gathering vari-coloured mosses and sweet wild flowers. Then it was that Mrs. Rockefeller, whose friendship and generosity for me as one of her former pupils became apparent, addressed herself to me and called up the past, as if it were a real pleasure to live over again her girlhood days, forgetful that she was now the wife of one whose name alone attracts attention wherever it is mentioned throughout the civilized world. She spoke of her late father affectionately, and remarked that her husband had named Spelman Institute at Atlanta, Georgia, for him. She further informed me that Mr. Rockefeller was metaphorically carrying it under his arm, and that during that same year he had given it $50,000. Further, she said that her father was a man of kindly impulses, and invariably favoured the underdog. As for herself, she said when teaching in the schools of Cleveland she had no pets, but that her sympathies invariably went out to the one who needed help. It was during this conversation that I made known to her my increasing desire to make a tour of the principal states of Europe, when she, with her characteristic generosity, suggested that I notify her when the time was ripe for my departure, and to anticipate by a few months, I will here record the fact that upon that notification her great husband sent me his check for half enough money to defray all the expenses of my trip. It was a gratuity pure and simple, for I had never had the opportunity of serving either of them in any practical way during my lifetime. As we neared the edge of the grove where the carriage was in waiting for us, Mrs. Rockefeller, with her own hands pinned on the bosom of my wife the tuft of pretty moss and the sweet wildflowers which she had gathered in the wood, a very gracious act, I must say, considering the relative social standing of the hostess and her guest. How thoroughly the act was appreciated may be known from the fact that until her dying day my dear deceased wife recalled the act, and spoke in terms of admiration and gratitude of it. Returning to the residence, we were joined by Mr. Rockefeller, who, being released from the conference, now commanded his time. A light luncheon was thereupon served on the veranda, of which all partook. My feelings on that occasion can be more easily imagined than described, for who was I, a poor colored man, dependent upon my daily toil for a very livelihood, and with no social recognition that I could boast of, aside from persons of my own caste, a strange word for America, that I should be sitting at luncheon with the financial leader of the whole world and his family. I recall that I had said to Mrs. Rockefeller during our stroll through the woods somewhat as follows: Mrs. Rockefeller, one of my most intelligent associates, maintains that social recognition of the colored man in the United States will begin at the top of society and progress downward, paradoxical as it may seem. Why so? She asked. Because, I replied, persons of unlimited means and fixed social status can with impunity afford to associate with persons of good moral character without losing their social standing, while others of small or no financial standing, and who themselves are struggling for social recognition, dare not take the risk. Well, she said, I had not thought of it in that light before. It seems reasonable, and may be a fact. The time of our departure was at hand. The carriage with the waiting coachman was standing in the porte cochere. The adieus were pronounced, when Mr. Rockefeller, and addressing himself to this writer, said, Mr. Green, I spend most of my time in New York, and I am seldom here to make use of these grounds. If at any time you wish to drive in them with your family or friends, you are welcome to do so. I heard him with amazement, thanked him, and we were whirled away by the well-groomed steeds. I have never to this day availed myself of his magnanimous offer to make use of his ample and beautiful grounds, though his kindly offer is graven up on the tablets of my heart, never to be erased. Some notice of our reception at the Rockefeller mansion found its way into the columns of the newspapers, after which I was approached by sundry needy persons, who tried to persuade me to use my influence with Mr. Rockefeller in their behalf, which of course I could not do. On another occasion, one of our best singers, who was arranging for a public concert, procured me to inquire of Mrs. Rockefeller whether her name might be used as a patroness. Mrs. Rockefeller answered by inviting Mrs. Green and me to call a second time and bring the singer with us, which we did. Again we were driven through some portion of the grounds, this time a slight shower of rain having previously fallen, and Mr. Rockefeller desiring to keep his drives in good condition, he mounted his bicycle and piloted the carriage some portion of the way. When we reached a knoll which overlooks the lake and the neighboring country, the driver, in attempting to make a short turn, nearly overturned the carriage, and I suspect that this writer prevented our hostess from falling out. On returning to the mansion, the sweet singer sang very beautifully for Mr. Rockefeller and his family, being accompanied on the piano by Miss Edith, now Mrs. McCormick of Chicago, who translated the difficult music at sight, to the astonishment of the singer and all others. I recall that Mr. Rockefeller remarked that in his youth he took lessons on the violin, and for a while practiced 6 hours a day. Was not this prophetic of future success in any vocation in which he might embark? For whoever has the nerve and persistency to apply himself to a violin or any other musical instrument 6 hours a day, will in the end say, I came, I saw, I conquered. It was on this occasion that we saw and were introduced to Mr. Rockefeller Sr. He was a large, well-built man of ruddy complexion, and the resemblance of the two sons whom I had met was so striking as to cause remark. When we were in the act of leaving, Mrs. Rockefeller invited us to attend a church social of the Second Baptist Church, which was scheduled to meet at their home the following week, and Mr. Rockefeller drew from one of his vest pockets a little bunch of banknotes with which he consoled the singer for Mrs. Rockefeller's refusal to lend her name as a patroness. We attended the church social, of course, and had seated at the table with us several members of the family, in addition to a very wealthy and prominent lady friend of theirs. On every occasion we were transported to and from the mansion in the carriage of our host and hostess, and although since then we have been entertained both at home and abroad by some very distinguished people, yet I have concluded that, in the courtesies and kindnesses showered upon us by Mr. and Mrs. Rockefeller, as I have related in the foregoing, we reached the zenith of our social preferment, just as at the Canton banquet I attained to the topmost height of my political aspirations. I've searched in vain to ascertain the underlying reason for the unusual and liberal courtesies bestowed upon me and mine by these august personages, whether it was to gratify the desire of his great and good wife, who was always fond of her old pupils, or whether Mr. Rockefeller had heard of my conduct in the House when a member attempted to assail his business integrity. Or was it the simple outflowing of two great big hearts, bent on scattering sunshine in the pathway of two humble beings, yearning for recognition and encouragement? I shall never know, perhaps, but of one fact we are certain: it was a substantial uplift, not only for us, but for others of our class, the good effects of which, like the ripples on ocean or the waves in the air, go onward and onward until they reach the bosom of Almighty God. During the first McKinley campaign for the presidency, I had stumped for the Republican party in Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Illinois, and Missouri. In addition to the foregoing, I had written a manifest for the use of Southern colored voters, which Mr. Hanna and Major Dick denominated my special literature, and, subject to their orders, I, with assistance of two of my sons, had mailed 14,000 copies to places in that section designated by them. After the President had been inaugurated, I circulated in Cleveland a petition amongst the leading politicians and business men requesting the President to appoint me to an office in Washington, at once honorable and lucrative. This petition was signed by great industrial heads, bankers, and railroad presidents. Having obtained the signatures of a goodly number of such men, who collectively were said to represent more than 200 millions of capital, I mailed the list to Mr. Rockefeller, with a request that he also sign it. I may add that I had drawn a line through the center of the page from top to bottom, and all who had theretofore received it had signed the name to the left of the line, and the occupation to the right. But when Mr. Rockefeller signed it, he wrote clear across the legal cap page in bold characters, John D. Rockefeller. I am regretting to this day that I released that document to be filed in the Interior Department in Washington, for in fact I valued it more than I did the little office which I secured, and though I made frequent inquiry and earnest effort to regain possession of it, no one had been able to locate it for me. Later on in life I received another communication from him, which contains his autograph, but I mourn the loss of the first, for it carried with it, in the very freedom and form of the writing of it, an intimation of the good will which inspired it. When I was in the employ of the United States government in Washington, I had occasion to write to Mrs. Rockefeller in behalf of a poor, forlorn person who was struggling against fate, and I asked for an alms for her. She sent the money, small in amount, together with a beautiful letter, still in my possession, of which the following is a copy. My dear Mr. Green, enclosed please find check for the amount desired in your letter of the 4th, to aid in lifting the debt from the distressed family who find in you a friend. The case is unique and sadly pathetic, and now many such there are. The wrongs of crushed humanity cry aloud from the ground. I recall with no small pleasure my teaching days, and many of the pupils still stand before me with distinctness, and not a few with distinction. Among these are yourself, who has conquered untold obstacles, and standing for God and for truth is helping the upward progress of race and the world. Mr. Rockefeller joins in kind regards for you and your family. Very sincerely yours, Mrs. John D. Rockefeller. Golf House, Lakewood, New Jersey, March 7, 1904. On another occasion, I enclosed to Mrs. Rockefeller a clipping from a newspaper which complimented me in no uncertain terms. The following is a copy of the letter which she sent to me, acknowledging the receipt of the same. I still retain the original. Golf House, Lakewood, New Jersey. My dear Mr. Green, I'm pleased that you decided to send me the clipping that your letter of the 3rd enclosed, and I am glad to be kept in touch with one of my pupils in the public school 40 or more years ago. Note, it had been just 52 years, JPG. The time does not seem so long to me since you sat behind the desk with Abner Griffin, not far removed, and the Austins and Richardsons in the same school. I am as proud and grateful as you and your family can be of the record you have made. It is a quiet but decisive victory against fearful odds which still beset the path of your race. I remember the pleasant call of Mrs. Green and yourself several years ago at Forest Hill. Mr. Rockefeller joins me in kindest regards to you both. Very sincerely, Laura S. Rockefeller. April 11, 1911. Following the death of my beloved wife, I received the following telegram. Tartown, New York, 2612. Mr. John P. Green. Letter, February 3rd, received the first we knew of the death of Mrs. Green. Be assured of our sympathy for you and yours in your great bereavement. John D. Rockefeller. There are other communications and transactions which I might record herein, but what I have written is sufficient, I trow, to prove that in my gradual rise from penury and want I had gained the countenance and association of some of the greatest and most powerful of God's children, and were it possible for me to close my biographical story right here, it would spell a career at once unique, if not romantic, and at least bordering on the successful. That Mr. Rockefeller may live to see the full fruition of his wonderful benefactions is my humble prayer. End of chapter 11.